The knock came at midnight, soft as a whisper. The weathered oak of Samuel's ranch house. Most men in these parts would have reached for their rifle and asked questions later, but Samuel Creek wasn't. When he opened that door, a young native girl, no more than 16, swaying on her feet with hunger carved into her hollow cheeks. He made a choice that would change everything. Pleased and broken, her dark eyes reflecting the lamplight like twin pools of desperate food for my people. Samuel Creek stood 6 feet tall, with hands scarred from years of working the unforgiving Montana. His ranch stretched across 3,000 acres of prime grazing land that had been contested, fought over, and claimed more times than he could count. At 42, he'd seen enough bloodshed to last 3 lifetimes. But looking at this girl, this child, something stirred in him that had nothing to do with territorial disputes or ancient grudges. "Come in," said, stepping aside. "What's your name?" "Morning Star," she replied, though her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen far too many dark nights. He stepped into his humble kitchen. Samuel noticed the way she moved, carefully, as if expecting an attack at any moment. Her buckskin dress was torn in several places, and her moccasins were worn through at the soles. It was her eyes. They held the kind of pain that comes from watching your people suffer while you stand helpless. "Sit," Samuel commanded gently, pulling out a chair at his rough hue. "When did you last—" Morning Star hesitated, clearly torn between desperate need and ingrained distrust. 3 days, he finally. Samuel's jaw tightened. 3 days. He moved quickly to his pantry, pulling out dried beef, beans, bread, and the last of his preserved peaches. As he prepared a plate, his mind raced. A 16-year-old girl didn't travel alone through hostile territory unless something terrible had driven her. "Where's your try?" Setting the food before her and watching as she fought the urge to devour it immediately. "Hidden," said carefully, "in the canyon, beyond the red rock." Samuel knew the place. Devil's Canyon, they called it, a maze of rock formations and caves where a small group could hide, but also where they could easily be trapped if discovered by the wrong. His expression darkened as pieces of the puzzle began forming in his mouth. Many? 200, maybe more. She paused, taking a careful. "Children, elders, women, the soldiers. They burned our village 2 weeks ago. Said we were harboring hostiles." Samuel's hands clenched into fists. He'd heard rumors about increased military activity in the region, about a new commander who believed the only good Indian was a confined Indian. Colonel Marcus Thornfield had arrived from back east with strict orders to clear the territory of any unauthorized native presence. The man had a reputation for harsh methods and little patience for what he called bleeding heart negotiations. "The soldiers," Samuel said carefully, "they're still looking for you?" Morning Star nodded, her eyes never leaving his face, gauging his reaction. "They have tracking dogs, local guides who know the land. We cannot stay hidden much longer." Samuel Creek had never been what anyone would call a political. He raised cattle, minded his own business, and paid his taxes. But he'd also been raised by a mother who believed that when God puts suffering right in front of you, turning away makes you complicit. And right now, suffering was sitting at his kitchen table in the form of a starving child whose only crime was being born into the wrong skin at the wrong time in history. "How did you find me? Your name is known among my people. 3 summers ago, you helped White Eagle when his horse was injured near your fence line. You gave him medicine for the animal and asked for nothing in return." Samuel remembered. An old Cheyenne man with kind eyes and a lame mustache. Samuel had indeed helped, though he'd never expected word of that small kindness to travel. In the West, reputation was everything, and apparently his had preceded him into places he'd never imagined. "What exactly are you asking of me?" Samuel, though he suspected he already knew. Morning Star straightened despite her exhaustion. "Food, supplies, we will pay what we can. And if I say no?" Her chin lifted with quiet dignity. "Then we continue to run until we cannot run any more." Samuel studied her face for a long moment. Those dark eyes saw not just inspiration, something else, a fierce intelligence and a courage that most grown men would envy. This wasn't just any hungry child. This was someone who'd been chosen by her to risk everything on the slimmest hope that a white rancher might show her. "I'll need to think about." Morning Star nodded. "Thank you for the food. I will go now." "Wait." Samuel's voice stopped her at the door. "It's dangerous out there at night. Wolves, mountain cats. You can sleep in the barn loft. We'll talk more in the morning." For the first time since she'd arrived, something like relief flickered across Morning's. She nodded and followed him out to the barn. He set her up with blankets. It was comfortable. As Samuel walked back to his house, his mind churned with possibilities and consequences. Helping refugees from military action could be considered aiding fugitives. Colonel Thornfield wasn't known for his lenient treatment of those who interfered with his operation. On the other hand, letting 200 people, including children and elders, starve in the wilderness wasn't something Samuel thought he could live with. He spent the rest of the night sitting on his porch, cleaning his rifle and thinking. By dawn, he'd made his decision. When Morning Star emerged from the barn as the first light painted the eastern sky pink and gold, she found Samuel loading supplies into his sacks of flour, salt pork, blankets, and basic medical everything a desperate group might need to. You don't have to do this. Samuel continued loading. Maybe not, but I'm going to anyway. The soldiers will come for you when they discover what you've done. Samuel's voice carried a grim determination. This is my land, earned with my sweat and secured by legal deed. I'll help who I choose to help. What Samuel didn't tell Morning Star was that he'd sent his ranch hand, Pete Martinez, on a fast horse to the territorial capital before dawn. Pete carried a telegram intended for Judge Harrison Williams, a man Samuel had known since childhood and who now sat on the territorial Supreme Court. The message was simple. Need legal counsel immediately? Stop. Matter of federal jurisdiction? Stop. Lives at stake? Stop. The ride to Devil's Canyon took 3 hours, with Morning Star guiding Samuel through hidden paths that avoided the main trails where Army patrols might be lurking. As they wound deeper into the Red Rock Maze, Samuel began to understand why the refugees had chosen this place. The canyon walls rose like ancient cathedrals around them, providing both shelter and concealment. But they also created a trap from which escape would be nearly impossible if discovered. When they reached the hidden camp, Samuel's breath caught in it. The sight before him was both heartbreaking and families huddled around small, nearly smokeless fires. Children played quietly in the dust while their mothers worked to stretch meager rations. Men stood guard at strategic points, their faces gaunt but alert. These weren't the savage warriors that Army propaganda portrayed. These people, human beings doing their best, an elderly man with silver braids and wearing a faded blue military, despite his aged appearance, is bearing Morning Star returns, he said in English, and she brings a friend. This is Samuel Creek, Star, the rancher I told you about. The old man studied Samuel with eyes that seemed to look straight through to his soul. I am Chief Standing Bear. I fought alongside white soldiers against the Confederate rebels. This jacket was given to me by General Sherman himself. He touched the faded fabric with something like pride, but that was long ago, when promises meant something. Samuel climbed down from his wagon and faced the chief. I've brought what I could, food, blankets, medicine. Standing Bear nodded slowly. And what do you want in return? It was a fair question. In Samuel's experience, nothing in the West came without a price. Nothing. Except maybe the knowledge that when my time comes to face my Maker, I won't have to explain why I let innocent people starve when I had the means to help. For a long moment the two men regarded each other. Then Standing Bear smiled, the first genuine smile Samuel had seen from any of the refugees. You are either very brave or very foolish, Samuel. Perhaps both. Probably both, Samuel. As the refugees began unloading the Samuel learned more about their situation. They were survivors from 3 different bands that had been scattered by Colonel Thornfield's aggressive policy. Some had been living peacefully on assigned reservation land when soldiers arrived with orders to relocate them to a more distant reservation with inadequate resources. Others had never signed treaties and had been living traditional lives in remote areas until military patrols started treating any native presence as hostile by default. The colonel believes that any Indian not under direct Army supervision is a potential threat. Standing Barracks, they walked through the camp. He has convinced his superiors that only complete control will ensure peace. Samuel watched children playing with stick horses and dolls. These don't look like threats to me. Fear makes men see enemies where none exist, Standing Bear replied sadly. And fear of losing face makes them refuse to admit their mistakes. As the day wore on, Samuel found himself drawn into conversations with various members of the group. He met Joseph Two Eagles, a man about his own age who had attended a government school back east and spoke perfect English. Joseph explained how the scattered bands had gradually found each other in the canyon, forming a temporary alliance born of mutual desperation. "We know this cannot last," Joseph said as they sat around a small fire. "Winter comes early in the mountains. The soldiers grow bolder each day. Soon they will find us." "What's your plan, Samuel?" Joseph laughed bitterly. "Survive another day, then another. Eventually, perhaps, reach Canada or find some remote place where we can live in peace." Samuel knew the odds of that happening were slim to none. The Army had resources, determination, and legal authority on their side. These refugees had only their courage and their mutual loyalty. That evening, as Samuel prepared to return to his ranch, Standing Bear pulled him aside. "You have done a good thing today, but you should know that Morning Star did not come to you by accident." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "She is my granddaughter, but she is also something more. Among our people she is known as one who sees. She dreams true dreams and feels the currents of fate, wind or skin." "I'm not sure I follow." Standing Bear smiled mysterious. "She dreamed of you 3 nights. In her dream, a white man with kind eyes and scarred hands would help her, but she also saw something else. She saw warriors, many warriors, standing guard around a ranch house. The sun rose." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. "Warriors? What warriors?" "That, my friend, remains to be seen. But Morning Star's dreams have never led us astray." As Samuel rode home through the gathering darkness, the old chief's words echoed in his mind. He'd never been a superstitious man, but something about the certainty in Standing Bear's voice unsettled. When he finally reached his ranch well after midnight, he found Pete Martinez waiting for him with news. "Judge Williams sent a reply to your telegram," Pete said, handing over a folded paper. "And there's been Army patrols asking questions. Word is that Colonel Thornfield is planning a major operation." Samuel read the telegram by lamplight. "Arriving tomorrow with territorial authority documentation." "Stop. Say nothing to anyone until I arrive." "Stop. Trust no one in uniform. Stop. Williams." That night Samuel slept fitful, his dreams filled with images of warriors and sunrise and choices that couldn't be undone. Judge Harrison Williams arrived the next afternoon, accompanied by 2 territorial marshals and carrying a leather satchel full of legal documents. Samuel had known Harrison since they were boys growing up in Missouri, and he'd never been more grateful for an old friendship. "Tell me everything," he said as they sat in Samuel's kitchen, "and don't leave out any detail." Samuel recounted the previous 2 days, from Morning Star's midnight arrival to discovery of the refugee. Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small journal. "You've stepped into a complex legal situation, Harrison." When Samuel finished, "Colonel Thornfield has broad authority, but it's not unlimited. The question is whether these refugees fall under military jurisdiction or civilian." The difference between a court hearing and a mass grave," Harris said bluntly. "If they're considered hostile combatants, Thornfield can act as he sees fit. But if they're civilians seeking refuge, they're entitled to due process under territorial law." One of the marshals, a stern man named Tucker. "The problem is proving civilian status." Samuel felt his stomach sink. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Harrison admitted. "I've heard rumors that Thornfield plans to sweep this entire region within the week. He's bringing in additional troops from Fort Ellis." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses reached them from outside. Samuel looked through his window and saw a column of cavalry approaching his ranch. At their head rode a tall man in an immaculate uniform, his posture rigid with military bearing. Colonel Thornfield. Samuel opened his door before the soldier. Colonel Marcus Thornfield dismounted and approached, his pale blue eyes taking in every detail of the scene before him. "Mr. Creek," Thornfield said in a clipped, "I'm Colonel Thornfield, commanding the Territorial Pacification. I believe you may have information relevant mission." "Colonel," Samuel replied, "this is Judge Williams from the Territory, and these are Federal Marshals Tucker and Morrison. What can I do for you?" Thornfield narrowed. He registered the presence of civilian. "I'm conducting operations against hostile Indian elements. I have reports that you may have had contact with fugitive natives." Harrison stepped forward. "Colonel, before we proceed, I should inform you that I'm here on official territorial business. Any actions taken in this jurisdiction must comply with civilian law as well as military authority." "Judge Williams," Thornfield said coolly, "I appreciate your concern for proper procedure, but this is a military matter. The hostiles I'm pursuing have engaged in acts of violence against federal property and personnel." What acts of violence? Thornfield's jaw tightened. They destroyed government survey markers and interfered with authorized land assessment activities. Samuel and Harrison exchanged glances. Destroying survey markers was hardly the same as attacking military personnel. Nevertheless, Thornfield continued, harboring fugitives from federal authority is a serious crime. Mr. Creek, I'll ask you directly, have you had any contact with unauthorized Indian elements last week? Samuel felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could lie, but that would only buy temporary. He could tell the truth and hope Harrison's legal maneuvering would provide protection. Or he could take a third path, one that would require more courage than he'd ever needed. Colonel, Samuel said carefully, I've had contact with refugees seeking humanitarian aid, families with children, and elderly members who are hungry and cold. Fugitives, Thornfield corrected, and you've aided them. I provided food to hungry people, Samuel replied. Last I checked, that wasn't a crime. Thornfield stepped closer, his hand resting on his saber hilt. Mr. Creek, you're interfering with a lawful military operation. I could have you arrested right now. Actually, you couldn't, Harrison interjected, not without proper civilian warrants which you don't possess. And any arrests made in this jurisdiction require territorial court. For a moment, Samuel thought Thornfield might order his soldiers to act anyway. The colonel's face flushed with anger, and his hand tightened on his weapon. But then his military training reasserted itself. He stepped back. Very well, Judge Williams, I'll expect full cooperation from civilian authorities. These hostiles represent a clear and present danger to territorial stability. I'm sure we can work together within proper legal channels, Harrison. After the soldiers left, Samuel felt both relief and apprehension. They'd won a temporary victory, but Thornfield wouldn't be deterred for long. What now? Now we work fast. I need to file for emergency territorial protection for civilian refugees. If I can get the paperwork through before Thornfield acts, it might provide enough legal cover to prevent a tragedy. But even as Harrison spoke, Samuel had a sinking feeling that legal maneuvers wouldn't be enough. Men like Thornfield didn't let technicalities stand in the way of what they considered necessary action. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He found himself pacing his porch, watching the horizon, and thinking about Standing Bear's words about Morning Star's prophetic dreams, warriors standing guard around his ranch at sunrise. What could that possibly mean? His question was answered when Pete Martinez came galloping up his drive in the pre-dawn darkness, his horse lathered with sweat. Samuel, Pete called out, you need to see this. Samuel grabbed his rifle and followed Pete to the edge of his property. What he saw there took his breath away. Silhouetted against the lightening sky, figures stood at regular intervals along his fence line. As the light grew stronger, he could make out more detail. Native warriors, armed but not threatening, spaced every 50 yards around the entire perimeter of his ranch. How many, Samuel? I counted over 200 so far, replied, and more are still arriving. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Samuel began walking toward the nearest warrior. The man was young, perhaps 25, traditional paint on his face, and carrying a Winchester rifle. When Samuel approached, the warrior nodded respectfully. Why are you here? Standing Bear sent word. The warrior ran carefully. Samuel Creek is friend to our people. Friends are protected. Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. These warriors had left the relative safety of their hiding place to stand guard around his property. They were risking everything to protect a white man who had shown them one day. As he walked the fence line, Samuel began to understand the full scope of what was happening. These weren't just the refugees from Devil's Canyon. Word had somehow spread through the hidden networks that connected scattered bands across the territory. Warriors from tribes he'd never heard of had come to stand guard around his ranch. By full sunrise, Samuel counted nearly 300 armed men positioned around his property. They stood like sentinels, facing outward, their presence protective and defiant. It was the most beautiful, terrifying sight he'd ever witnessed. Harrison Williams emerged from the house, having been awakened by the commotion. When he saw the ring of warriors, his face went pale. My God, he breathed, what have we done? The right thing, Samuel said firmly. The only thing. But even as he spoke, Samuel could see dust clouds on the horizon. Thornfield's column was approaching, and when the colonel saw 300 armed native warriors surrounding a white ranch, Samuel knew there would be no more talk of legal technicality. The confrontation that would determine the fate of Standing Bear's people was about to begin. Colonel Thornfield arrived with over 100 cavalry troops, artillery pieces, and enough firepower to level a small town. When he saw the warriors surrounding Samuel's ranch, purple with rage. This is exactly what I warned about. Hostile forces gathering for organized resistance. Harrison rode out to meet the military column before it could advance within rifle range of the native position. "Colonel," Harrison called out, "I need to speak with you before any action is taken." Thornfield spurred his horse forward, his hand on his pistol. "Judge Williams, this situation has moved far beyond civilian jurisdiction. I'm looking at an armed insurrection that threatens every settler in the territory. You're looking at a peaceful, protective action. These warriors haven't threatened anyone or taken any aggressive action. They're armed, hostile Indians surrounding a white settlement. That's aggression enough." Samuel rode up to join the conversation, his own rifle across his saddle. "Colonel, these men are here to protect my property, not threaten it. I invited them." Thornfield stared at Samuel as if he'd lost his mind. "You invited 300 armed savages around your ranch?" "I invited friends to help protect something valuable, just like you'd invite neighbors to help with a barn raising or a cattle drive. This is madness." Then, louder, "Mr. Creek, I'm ordering you to disperse these hostiles immediately, or I'll consider you in armed rebellion against federal authority." Before Samuel could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. Standing Bear had approached on foot, walking calmly between the opposing forces with Morning Star at his side. The old chief carried no weapons and showed no fear, despite being within easy shooting range of 100 cavalry rifles. "Colonel Thornfield," Standing Bear said formally, "I am Chief Standing Bear of the Northern Cheyenne. These warriors answer to me." Thornfield's hand moved to his pistol grip. "Then you'll order them to disperse immediately." "I will not," Standing Bear replied calmly. "Samuel Creek is under our "I don't give a damn about your protection," exploded. "You're all fugitives from federal authority, and I'm placing you under arrest." "On what charges?" Harrison. "Destruction of federal property, interference with government operations, and now armed insurrection." Standing Bear. "Colonel, the survey markers you speak of were placed on sacred burial ground. We moved them respectfully to preserve the resting places of our ancestors. If that is destruction of property, then we are guilty." "And the interference with government operations?" Harrison pressed. "We refuse to relocate to a reservation with poisoned water and insufficient food." Standing. "If surviving is interference, then we are guilty of that as well." Thornfield was growing increasingly agitated. "You admit to violating federal orders?" "I admit to protecting my people," Standing Bear, "just as you protect yours." Samuel could see the situation spiraling toward violence. Thornfield was a military man trained to solve problems with force, and the sight of hundreds of armed native warriors was triggering every instinct he possessed. But these warriors weren't here to fight. They were here to bear witness, to stand as living proof that not all conflict had to end in bloodshed. "Colonel," said, dismounting and walking between the two, "what if there was another way?" "There is no other way, Thornfield. These hostiles will disperse or be dispersed." "What if they weren't? What if they were legal residents with proper documentation?" Harrison's eyes lit up. "Territorial citizenship app. I could process them under emergency provisions." Thornfield laughed harshly. "You can't make 300 fugitives into legal citizens with paperwork." "Actually can," Harrison said, his voice growing stronger as he realized possibilities. "The Territorial Citizenship Act of 1876 allows for group applications under extraordinary circumstances. If these people pledge allegiance to territorial law and agree to peaceful settlement, I have the authority to grant provisional citizenship status." "This is preposterous," Thornfield protested. Standing Bear looked intrigued. "What would the citizenship?" Harrison pulled out his legal pad and began writing rapidly. "Recognition of territorial law, agreement to peaceful dispute resolution, registration with local authorities, and a pledge of non-aggression against other citizens." "And in return?" Standing Bear asked. "Legal protection under territorial law, the right to own property, access to territorial courts for dispute resolution, and protection from arbitrary arrest or detention." Samuel felt hope stirring in his chest. It was audacious, probably unprecedented, and might not hold up under federal review. But it might buy time for a real solution to emerge. "My people would need land," Standing Bear said carefully. "Not reservation land with inadequate resources, but real land where we can live according to our ways while respecting territorial law. Samuel took a deep breath. The biggest decision of his life. I have 3,000 acres, more land than I can properly use. I'll deed half of it to Standing Bear's people under territorial homestead provision. Thornfield's face went apoplectic. You cannot seriously be considering this, Harrison scribbling furiously. Actually, it could work. Territorial homestead law allows for communal land grants to organized groups. If Standing Bear's people register as a territorial community and agree to peaceful coexistence, they'd have legal standing. This sets a dangerous. Every hostile band in the territory will expect the same treatment. Maybe treating people like human beings instead of problems to be solved would prevent most of this conflict in the first place. Standing Bear was conferring quietly with several other leaders who had approached during the discussion. After several minutes, he returned to the group. We accept these terms, he said formally, but we require one addition. What addition, Harrison? Samuel Creek must be adopted into our community as an honorary member, Standing Bear said. Our protection of him is not temporary. It is permanent. Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. Chief, that's not necessary. It is necessary, Standing Bear replied firmly. You risked everything to help strangers. That makes you family. Colonel Thornfield looked like he was about to have apoplexy. This is completely irregular. I cannot allow this precedent to be set. Colonel, Harrison said calmly, unless you can prove these people have committed actual crimes, not administrative violations, but real crimes, you don't have the authority to prevent them from seeking territorial citizenship. I'll appeal this to Washington, Thornfield. You do that, Harrison. In the meantime, I'm processing these applications under emergency territorial provisions. For a moment, Samuel thought Thornfield might order his troops to attack anyway. The colonel's face was flushed with rage, and his hand trembled on his pistol grip. But gradually, military discipline reasserted itself. Attacking territorial citizens under the protection of the territorial court would be a career-ending move, even for a colonel with political connection. This isn't over, Thornfield said finally. I'll have every one of these applications reviewed by federal authorities. I'm sure you will. Until then, these people are under territorial protection. As Thornfield and his troops withdrew, Samuel felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it would face challenges in the future. But for now at least, no one was going to starve in devils. Over the following weeks, the transformation was remarkable. Standing Bear's people moved onto the land Samuel had deeded to them, establishing a community that balanced traditional ways with territorial requirements. They registered with local authorities, established formal leadership structures, and began the process. Morning Stars gifted at organization she established where native children learned English while also preserving their own language. The community's hunters and gatherers had game and plants that supplemented the agricultural efforts of Samuel's. The arrangement faced skepticism and outright hostility from some quarters. Several neighboring ranchers complained about having Indians so close to their property, but gradually practical benefits began to outweigh prejudicial concerns. The native community's knowledge of the land proved invaluable during a severe drought that summer. Their tracking skills helped recover stolen cattle, and their medicinal knowledge saved lives during a flu outbreak. Colonel Thornfield continued his efforts to overturn the territorial citizenship grant, but the federal review process moved slowly. Meanwhile, the peaceful and productive nature of the arrangement began attracting positive attention from territorial authorities. Governor Potts himself visited the community and left impressed by what he saw. This could be a model for the entire territory, he told Samuel. If different peoples can live and work together like this, it might point the way toward a more stable future. Samuel agreed, though he knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Fear and prejudice didn't disappear overnight, and there would always be those who preferred conflict to cooperation. But as he stood on his porch each morning, watching Morning Star teach children of different backgrounds to read together, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The 300 warriors who had stood guard around his fence at sunrise had become neighbors, friends, and family. They'd shown him that protection didn't always require walls or weapons. Sometimes it just required the courage to stand together against those who would divide you. 6 months later, Samuel received word that Colonel Thornfield had been transferred to a desk job in Washington. The federal review of the territorial citizenship grants had concluded that, while irregular, The arrangements were legal and beneficial to territorial stability. Standing Bear's community was officially recognized as a Creek Valley settlement with full rights under territorial. Morning Star, now 17 and fluent in 3 languages, had become an unofficial ambassador between the settlement and the surrounding white communities. Her combination of intelligence, diplomacy, and quiet charisma made her effective at bridging cultural divides that had seemed insurmountable. "You saved us," she told Samuel one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "No," Samuel replied. "We saved each other." And as the stars emerged in the vast Montana sky, Samuel Creek reflected on the strange turns life could take. A hungry girl had knocked at his door in the middle of the night, and by sunrise 300 warriors had been guarding his fence. But the real miracle wasn't the protection. It was the community they'd built together, one that proved different people could not only coexist but thrive when they chose cooperation over conflict. The West was still a hard and often unforgiving place, but in this small corner of Montana Territory, something new was growing, something that pointed toward a future where a person's worth wasn't determined by the color of their skin or the language they spoke, but by the content of their and the kindness they showed to strangers who knocked on their door in the dark. Sometimes the smallest action could change everything. Samuel Creek had learned that lesson when a hungry girl named Morning Star showed him that true strength came not from building walls, but from building bridges, and in the end, that had made all the difference.